Thank you to Rise, and thank you to Nikki and Caleb for the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you about OIG's work in the Medicare Advantage space and connect with the plans, the companies, and vendors that work in Medicare Advantage. This is my first time at the Rise conference, so I'm going to give you a little bit of context about the organization that I lead, the Office of the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. At OIG, our mission focuses on protecting those over 100 programs that make up the HHS portfolio, as well as the people who are served by those programs. To accomplish this, OIG's team of auditors, of evaluators, we provide independent, objective information to program administrators, to policymakers, to stakeholders, and our criminal investigators identify and take swift action against fraud. We endeavor to ensure that program dollars are effectively and appropriately spent, and that programs operate efficiently, effectively, and with integrity. At OIG, we are relentlessly focused on getting results. We try to maximize the impact of every single dollar that Congress invests in us. And we don't have a huge amount of money to work with. I was explaining to Caleb and Nikki backstage, we have 2 cents for every $100 that the department spends. So we target our enforcement and oversight based on our assessment of risk. We look at things like how much money is at stake, how vulnerable is the population that we're talking about, and what is the scope of potential harm. When I talk about what any Office of Inspector General does, I want to ensure that people understand that we do not run programs. We do not set policies. To do that, we would essentially be the arm of the department, an arm of CMS in this instance. OIG oversight and enforcement must be independent from the agencies it oversees in order for our work to be credible. Our work is meant to be a roadmap for improving vulnerabilities in the programs. So when you pick up one of our reports, you're inevitably going to see some opportunities for improvement, some overpayments, some gaps in controls that really is rooted in our mission. We are meant to root out fraud, waste, and abuse in programs. But we do make sizable efforts to help industry understand and proactively comply with requirements. While OIG serves a very different role than private plans, I see similarities between our missions. From viewing some of your missions and even hearing Caleb and Nikki talk, people are the through line. Most plans have missions that are centered on people, on your enrollees, and improving their health. Missions like helping people on their path to better health, keeping seniors healthy and independent. And so in that way, our missions are very aligned, putting people and their health at the center of what it is that we do. So leading up to this talk, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the mission of Medicare Advantage. And it's a timely moment to do so. After all, this year, 50% of Medicare enrollees are going to be enrolling in Medicare Advantage. The program currently provides coverage for over 31 million seniors and people with disabilities. And private plans are available to 99% of Medicare enrollees across the country. Given the size and the scope of Medicare Advantage, now is also an opportunity to really reflect on risks. To reflect on risks and how Medicare Advantage and the plans, companies, and vendors that work in Medicare Advantage can mitigate those risks. Today, I have a dual message for you. First, the risks of fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicare Advantage are significant. That includes alleged fraud and abuse by plans, by vendors, and providers. The effects of this conduct have major consequences on the financial integrity of Medicare Advantage, as well as on the program and the plan's reputations. Private plans must make improving compliance in Medicare Advantage a top priority. Second, because criminals are becoming increasingly sophisticated and targeting plans to steal from them, more coordination between plans and with law enforcement is very much needed. Today, I'm going to share some concrete examples of OIG's work that will demonstrate the seriousness of the risks that we have found in Medicare Advantage. And then I have 3 value propositions for you. Finally, I'll explain what OIG is doing and how our work can help inform your efforts as you work to take advantage of some of these value propositions to set up better self-policing and compliance in your own programs. OIG representatives have participated in this conference for over the past few years, and we have a group of folks here today who will be participating in a panel to take a deeper dive into some of our Medicare Advantage work. I'm here for this conference in my surgical boot to underscore my commitment toward ensuring that Medicare Advantage program and plans effectively combat fraud, waste, and abuse. That is one of my top priorities. And I hope to persuade you that it should be a top priority of yours as well. Strengthening Medicare Advantage requires commitment and effective, coordinated action by both government and by industry. So looking back at the history of managed care, I'm not sure many would have predicted that the program would be serving nearly 50% of the Medicare population. The ebbs and the flows of Medicare managed care stretch back to the original Medicare Act of 1965. Congress included group practice prepayment plans to deliver health care for a defined population. By 1968, however, only 6 such plans existed. Over the next 20 years, managed care would struggle to gain traction in Medicare. By 1991, about 90 managed care plans covered about 1.5 million Medicare enrollees, roughly 4% of the Medicare population at the time. The 1990s were a turning point for managed care as a model. By 1995, 50% of Americans receiving employer-sponsored health insurance were enrolled in managed care plans. This renewed popularity and the problem of continued cost growth in Medicare led Congress to turn to managed care as a solution. In 1997, Congress established the modern version of Medicare Advantage known as Medicare Plus Choice. Just a year prior, Congress also recognized the need to root out fraud, waste, and abuse more aggressively in Medicare and Medicaid and enacted HIPAA. Best known for its privacy provisions, HIPAA established new funding and authorities for the government to fight healthcare fraud, and it directed federal law enforcement to coordinate with healthcare plans for the purpose of fighting fraud across the healthcare industry. At the time, many believed that managed care would be less susceptible to the types of fraud, waste, and abuse that were pervasive in fee-for-service. With fixed, capitated payments, the thinking went that plans would be appropriately incentivized to address fraud. Through risk-based payments, plans would take on the task of preventing fraud, along with managing costs and patient care to protect their bottom lines. And Medicare Plus Choice included other features such as risk adjustment payments, features that it was believed would align plans' financial success with the goals of the program, like ensuring access for Medicare enrollees regardless of their health status. Under HIPAA, Congress established very broad anti-kickback statute safe harbors for managed care, and this was very telling. Congress viewed managed care as a lower risk program than fee-for-service Medicare. OIG's rule implementing the safe harbors echoed this sentiment. It stated that managed care plans, quote, presented little or no risk of overutilization or increased cost to the federal healthcare programs. At the time, this lower risk was attributed to the managed care payment structure, that fixed capitated payment and regulatory constraints. Over the many years I have served in government, I've heard similar predictions for managed care, especially related to oversight and OIG's oversight in particular. During conversations about funding our oversight, I've heard oversight isn't necessary for managed care. Shifting the financial risk to plans will incentivize good behavior and push the plans to root out fraud and waste themselves. Unfortunately, time and experience have proven these predictions wrong. Today, we have abundant evidence that fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicare Advantage are more serious problems than the early prognosticators had hoped. For instance, we're seeing increased risks of healthcare fraud, gaming of program incentives, and improper payments. These issues affect Medicare's ability to serve current enrollees and impair the long-term sustainability of the program itself. I'll offer some specific examples from OIG's work that demonstrate the scope and the breadth of Medicare Advantage risks that are on our radar. The first is the real and the persistent risk of healthcare fraud. Healthcare fraud affects every payer in the United States, government, private plans, and everyone in between. We know that fraud does not just disappear because a private insurance company pays the claim instead of CMS. We're concerned about fraud committed by providers, by suppliers, and others against plans. In 2019, after Operation Brace Yourself, a major law enforcement operation that shut down a $1 billion medical brace scheme, we saw how quickly fraud can jump from fee-for-service to Medicare managed care. After the law enforcement action, Medicare fee-for-service claims for orthotic braces dropped by 9%. Shortly after that, though, claims in Medicare Advantage for the same types of braces increased by 22%. This migratory effect of fraud was not years later, but weeks later. Once criminals found out about the takedown, they switched their scheme to focus on the plans. In one case, husband and wife owners of a medical equipment company were fraudulently billing Medicare Part B for these braces. Our enforcement action dried up that well, hindering their original scheme, but did the husband and wife stop? No. They immediately pivoted. They opened a new company at the same address and started billing Medicare Advantage plans instead. We know from experience that fraudsters pay close attention to industry trends, and more importantly, they pay attention to where the money is. The risk of provider-level fraud will only increase as provider enrollment continues to grow. To crack down on provider and supplier fraud, we're working with our law enforcement partners and engaging with planned special investigative units. We aim to increase referrals of potential fraud from the plans that are on the front lines to spot it. We share data and we get leads from CMS and other programs, and we spot and work to close gaps in data that can hinder prevention and rapid detection of fraud. Beyond provider and supplier fraud, we're concerned about trends we're seeing and whether this potentially indicates that private plans are defrauding Medicare. We routinely get referrals and complaints from whistleblowers and from others. That includes organization insiders who see fraud risks or unethical conduct and may be frustrated or disillusioned by the plan's failure to address it. Insider referrals have led to several significant settlements with plans and with others. Settlements that have resolved allegations of plans acting intentionally to get larger risk adjustment payments, or allegations of plans ignoring results and never acting on their own audits and other internal information on potential fraud. Holding industry accountable is one fundamental way to strengthen Medicare Advantage. And across the healthcare industry, we're holding companies and individuals accountable for misconduct. Next is the risk of gaming. At OIG, we examine how programs are designed and whether they achieve their goals like cost effectiveness and quality of care. We identify the potential program risks that result in undesirable behavior, like upcoding, stinting on care, or misreporting or misrepresentation of data. Our work consistently shows that program risks in Medicare can have huge impacts, leading to improper payments costing hundreds of millions of dollars and imposing barriers to enrollees from receiving necessary care. Risk adjustment, and I didn't see the hands from backstage, but it sounds like there are a lot of folks here from risk adjustment. Risk adjustment in Medicare Advantage is an example of how oversight of well-intentioned policy helps ensure that the policy works as intended. There is no doubt that risk adjustment is important to the success of the program. It's designed to compensate plans for the increased cost of treating older and sicker beneficiaries, and thus to discourage plans from preferential enrollees of healthier individuals. Paying plans more to care for people with serious medical needs preserves and expands access. Nevertheless, our work has demonstrated there are significant problems with risk adjustment. The program is designed to compensate for sicker patients, but has had few ways to assess whether plans are legitimately caring for a sicker population or are just upcoding diagnoses. OIG's work has shown the potential risk of inadequate care for plan enrollees. In other words, that plans might be stinting on care. If enrollees with more expensive care needs are not getting treatment commensurate with their diagnoses, then risk adjustment is not fulfilling its purpose. A 2021 OIG report examined practices by plans and vendors to identify diagnoses for enrollees through health risk assessments and chart reviews. Both are allowable practices that are often helpful for plans and patients. However, our report raises serious questions about diagnoses that plans identified through these practices and needed care that enrollees might not be getting. Medicare Advantage enrollees may have significant unmet needs based on the diagnoses recorded by the plans. We found that Medicare Advantage companies received over $9 billion in risk adjustment payments in 1 year for serious medical conditions that only appeared from assessments or chart reviews. 20 Medicare Advantage companies accounted for $5 billion of those payments. Again, risk adjustment is an important tool to ensure private plans are compensated appropriately for the patients that they serve. However, when we see patterns that indicate patients may not be getting treatment for serious medical conditions, it raises the question of whether risk adjustment is working to preserve and expand access to care or whether the diagnoses are accurate. For instance, when we narrowed that lens to look at those 20 companies that received such a big proportion of risk adjustment payments, we saw something interesting. These 20 companies received over $500 million in risk adjustment payments for patients that plans diagnosed with serious mental illness, such as major depressive, bipolar, and paranoid disorders. Yet no service record, and I'll repeat that, no service record showed that those same enrollees received treatment for those serious conditions. The same applies for some of the other conditions that you see here on this slide. And this is a very troubling gap for patients. Or if the diagnoses do not reflect unmet needs, then equally troubling is the accuracy of the diagnoses and why they were reported in the first place. Relatedly, in a 2020 report, we found that plan vendors or partners that conduct in-home assessments contribute to questionable diagnoses. The top 8 vendors or partners accounted for nearly 90% of the diagnoses that had no associated service record. This is a very lucrative practice, too. The same 8 entities that generated over $1 billion in risk adjustment payments that went to about 50 plans were owned by one parent company. Again, this trend raises questions about how to best ensure that patients with legitimate needs are getting care or whether the diagnoses submitted are accurate. When Medicare Advantage initially rolled out, many believed that risk-based capitated payments in managed care would limit financial risk to Medicare. However, the accuracy of the risk adjustment payments raises important questions about how much financial risk the government still bears under Medicare Advantage. and whether plans are complying with program rules when they claim risk adjustment payments. OIG's audit work has demonstrated that some of the largest insurance companies and their plans across different markets have consistently received risk adjustment overpayments. Across 17 OIG audits issued since 2019, OIG could not find support for 69% of diagnoses used for risk adjustment and identified over $100 million in overpayments, and these are not extrapolated amounts, they're not. CMS, the Government Accountability Office, and others have identified similar patterns, highlighting concern about the integrity of risk adjustment payments. I've said it before several times up to this point, and I'll say it again. We understand how important risk adjustment is to the overall success of the program. With billions of dollars in risk adjustment payments each year, it is mission critical work for us, and it makes up a very important part of that 2 cents of $100 that the department spends. It's mission critical work for us to ensure these payments are accurate, both for the program and for the wellness of beneficiaries. OIG work and recommendations support CMS's recent risk adjustment validation rule, and I know a big portion of this conference is focused on that. The rule supports stronger oversight of Medicare Advantage plans and recovery of misspent taxpayer dollar funds. Enhanced oversight will help ensure that plans are taking steps to reduce improper payments and to improve the financial integrity of the program. Other OIG work highlights how incentives under capitated payments to reduce costs can result in plans inappropriately impeding beneficiaries' access to care. An April 2022 report looking at prior authorization revealed several basic breakdowns at plans that led to improper denials of Medicare-covered services. We found that 13% of prior authorization denials were for care requests that in fact did meet Medicare coverage rules. Similarly, 18% of payment denials were inappropriate and should have been paid. One common breakdown involves plans requesting unnecessary or duplicative information and documentation. This practice led to unnecessary delays in care for patients. We're currently conducting work to assess similar issues in Medicaid managed care. So the bottom line is that the risks of fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicare Advantage are real and they are significant. Now, let me provide you with 3 value propositions explaining why plans should prioritize actions to address these risks. 1, healthy compliance is just smart business. Plans have a stake in the Medicare Advantage program achieving its goals of delivering equitable, comprehensive, and person-centered care that is sustainable and that is affordable. Fraud, waste, and abuse can impede those goals and jeopardize the future success of the program and, relatedly, the plans. The health of many companies that operate managed care plans is closely tied to the health of the Medicare Advantage program. They go hand in glove. Analyses of public earning reports highlight that several large insurance companies receive over 75% of their revenue from Medicare and from Medicaid, and some are even higher than that. Smart and proactive compliance is just smart business practice. The stakes are also high for companies that receive a significant portion of their revenue from taxpayers. When risks become actual, costly problems, those problems can threaten the success of the plans and the Medicare Advantage program as a whole, and it's happened before. In the mid-1980s, Medicare's largest HMO in the country, International Medical Centers in Florida, was shut down due to systemic fraud and corruption. I'll pause for a second for you to read this quote from a Washington Post article published at the time. OIG, the FBI, the Department of Justice found widespread issues at the plan, including intentionally dropping sick patients to avoid costs, impeding access, and a litany of other serious allegations. The unscrupulous conduct of this one company marred the reputation of Medicare managed care for a decade. The case was cited often in resistance to growing the managed care model in Medicare well into the 1990s. While this may be a particularly egregious example, it demonstrates that the behavior of one plan can affect the trust that Congress, taxpayers, and potential enrollees have in managed care as a model. Prioritizing actions that detect and mitigate fraud, waste, and abuse can help improve and preserve the reputation of the Medicare Advantage program and the plans that participate in it. Making compliance a priority can lead to a whole host of positives. Proactively addressing fraud, waste, and abuse within plans can lead to greater efficiency, better customer service for enrollees, improved public perception, and better plan ratings. Making data more complete and consistent can help identify fraud and provide more clarity about other plan operations. Savings captured by preventing problems can be redirected to improving services for enrollees. And for the attorneys in the crowd, it can also reduce the risk for relator or qui tam lawsuits that can have serious reputational, financial, and legal consequences. Effective risk reduction creates a feedback loop that makes Medicare Advantage programs even more attractive for future enrollees, policymakers, Congress, shareholders, and investors. Again, it's just smart business practice. Second, Medicare Advantage is under increasing scrutiny. With growth in Medicare Advantage will come more scrutiny of plans. So my second value proposition is that it will pay dividends to prepare for and embrace oversight, not just our oversight, but the kind of internal oversight and self-policing that you yourselves can do. We know that OIG's oversight is not always popular in the healthcare industry. In fact, I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say it's almost never popular. No one wakes up looking forward to an OIG audit or getting a subpoena from an OIG investigator. The natural inclination is to want less oversight, not necessarily for any malicious or nefarious reason. Instead, it's an understandable reaction to overflowing inboxes and the immense complexity of healthcare. All of us deal with tough decisions that often have enormous ramifications. Defending those hard decisions by downplaying the need for and the value of oversight is understandable. But downplaying the value of oversight, whether internal or external, carries organizational risk and a lot of missed opportunities. Plans can demonstrate that they take problems seriously through proactive self-policing and responding effectively to problems that are unearthed. Companies and others that dismiss problems uncovered by oversight often find themselves defending their actions later in other forums, such as in relator lawsuits. Across healthcare, we have seen increasingly sophisticated compliance programs that proactively find problems so that companies can fix them. Those companies also use OIG's self-disclosure protocol to rectify problems to avoid future legal entanglements. Although most self-disclosures come from healthcare providers, plans can use the self-disclosure protocols as well. For decades, compliance officials in healthcare companies have looked to OIG oversight as a roadmap for avoiding problems in their own companies, and you can too. For instance, OIG reports have found data gaps at plans related to denied claims and identifiers for ordering and referring providers. These are the kinds of data that plans should have and that you can improve. Also, much can be learned from our audits, our evaluations, our investigations, advisory opinions, and legal actions about emerging risk areas. Our work plan, which we update monthly and post on our website, tells you what issues we have our attention. We know from roundtable discussions with industry that our methodologies are often instructive for companies seeking to identify potential vulnerabilities internally and remedy them. And as the Inspector General at HHS, I can tell you with great certainty that you will see us expanding our oversight of Medicare Advantage in the coming years. Now is truly the time to embrace the benefits of proactive, effective compliance actions and oversight. 3, because fraud schemes are becoming increasingly sophisticated, there's tremendous value in collaboration among plans and with law enforcement. In recent years, the scale and extent of damages from healthcare fraud schemes have increased. Criminal organizations have adapted their schemes with changing times. They're aware of the weak spots in Medicare and at specific plans. Consequently, healthcare fraud spreads quickly. By manipulating technology, criminals can activate a scheme in all 50 states with speed and relative ease. For instance, in one recent case, a foreign national living in Florida illicitly obtained a provider's billing number. They used that number and Medicare patient data purchased from corrupt call centers to submit more than $100 million in fraudulent claims for medical braces to plans. As plans would identify a suspicious claim or send a request for records to the provider, the perpetrators would shut down one shell company and then open a new one in a different state and target different plans. Action by OIG and our law enforcement partners shut the scheme down, but I often think about how fast it could have been shut down had there been more communication and more collaboration across plans and with law enforcement. So be aware of risk and recognize that if fraud is left undetected and unaddressed at one plan, that scheme will likely have a contagion effect and is likely to spread to other plans. One plan's health or lack thereof affects the broader population of plans. And each plan has tremendous potential to protect the larger community. When fraud is detected, also, please refer it to law enforcement. We can aid in identifying broader trends before they can metastasize and take enforcement action to hold wrongdoers accountable. Also, take a look at lines of communication with other plans and with law enforcement and take steps to improve them. Promising communication models include having plans investigative units hold regular meetings with federal and state law enforcement. Good communication can and does stop fraud early. So what is OIG doing about all of this? Promoting efficiency and effectiveness of HHS programs is baked into the mission of HHS OIG. We want Medicare Advantage to be successful. OIG's work helps ensure that the program works as intended for Medicare enrollees and for taxpayers. For that to happen, Medicare Advantage plans must be successful at ensuring their enrollees receive high-quality healthcare services that are cost-effective. For our Medicare Advantage work, OIG is focused on fighting fraud, promoting access to high-quality care, and providing comprehensive financial oversight. Let's start with holding wrongdoers accountable. Preventing and mitigating fraud benefits patients, Medicare, and plans. I am committed to taking swift action against those who defraud Medicare Advantage. That includes fraud by plans or fraud committed by providers or others against plans, enrollees, and the program. But OIG cannot fight fraud alone. Our valuable partnership with plans, investigative units, and compliance officials is key to combating fraud that harms plans, enrollees, and the Medicare Advantage program. In January of this year, OIG hosted a summit focused on fraud in Medicare Advantage. We brought together plan representatives and members of OIG, the Department of Justice, FBI, CMS, and CMS's contractors. We planted the seeds for what I hope is sustainable engagement with plans by providing information on what to expect when working with prosecutors and investigators. That includes tips for making actionable referrals and the need to ensure timely access to data for law enforcement. We want to build on the success of that summit to foster increased communication between plans and with law enforcement in order to improve our collective fraud-fighting abilities. Next, promoting access to high-quality care. People enrolled in managed care should have access to safe, appropriate, and equitable care. And we see efforts and plans to make that happen. That includes value-based care models with providers, figuring out how to address social determinants of health for their enrollees, and deploying technologies to better connect and coordinate care. OIG is ramping up work to oversee whether plans are meeting program requirements in the delivery of care. We'll examine issues like network adequacy and benefit design, and we'll continue work examining prior authorization and payment denials. We're continuing conducting work assessing plans' actions to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in access to care, quality of care, and in care outcomes. We hope that you'll find that work instructive as you consider this crucial issue in your own companies. Next, providing comprehensive financial oversight, sort of OIG's bread and butter. OIG's work to ensure the financial integrity of Medicare Advantage will continue to examine risk adjustment. We want to see how program changes affect payment accuracy, such as increased use of encounter data and risk adjustment. We're planning work examining other financial issues, including bonus payments and medical loss ratios. OIG is also planning to review payments made by plans to providers and vendors. As the healthcare environment has become more complex, we recognize that plans have outsourced some functions to vendors and to contractors. Assessing how vendor and contractor payments and performance affect the financial integrity of Medicare Advantage is increasingly important. Finally, I would be remiss in not pointing out the importance, the critical importance of having complete, accurate, and timely data. Improving data within Medicare Advantage is essential to all of the efforts that I've talked about this morning, and we'll continue to focus on data integrity in all of our work. So we've spent a good 40 minutes together, and I hope that you found value in learning more about our work and an encouragement to take on some of that self-policing on your own. I want to end where I began. OIG's mission and the mission of plans center around the health and welfare of individuals served by Medicare. This morning, I asked you to focus on two objectives to further our missions: prioritizing compliance within your own plan and improving coordination with law enforcement. I recognize that these objectives might sound great in a talk, but may sound removed from the daily realities of operating large, complex insurance plans. So I want to conclude by leaving you with a practical way of thinking about this concept. I heard it explained once, and it's always resonated with me. If you want to know whether your company has effectively prioritized ways to address fraud, waste, and abuse, think about an individual employee. That employee faces an ethical dilemma that forces them to make a choice. Has your company informed, trained, and empowered that employee to make the right choice? Are they empowered to make the choice that is consistent with your mission? And in times when that employee makes the wrong choice, does your company have the right capabilities to detect it, to fix it, and to ensure others don't do the same? When you're back at work later this week or next, I hope that you'll take time to reflect on this milestone moment for Medicare Advantage and what it means for your plan and company going forward, to assess what more can be done to better serve your enrollees and fulfill your very important missions. I hope I've persuaded you that being proactive in prioritizing actions to address fraud, waste, and abuse is a necessary and value-added element of plan and vendor operations. Improved integrity and fiscal accountability will allow private plans and Medicare to better serve the over 31 million seniors and people with disabilities now and well into the future. I thank you, for the invitation to speak with you today, and I wish you a great rest of your conference.